This is an important vote and that will be taken on an important motion, for it seeks to answer questions regarding Canada's complicated and increasingly difficult relationship with the government of the People's Republic of China. Should the House of Commons pass this motion, a special parliamentary committee would be reconstituted with MPs from all recognized caucuses to investigate and study how Beijing is influencing or has influenced the federal government, how Beijing is advancing PRC national interests within our country, and how Beijing is even at times skirting Canadian laws meant to protect our citizens, our values, and security. I'm supporting this motion because of my commitment to Canada. I'm also supporting it because I want better nation-to-nation relations with mainland China. But our connection with Beijing cannot be based on blind trust, especially when we as parliamentarians consider its reversal in Hong Kong, its aggressive posture around the South China Sea, the terrible genocide against Uyghurs, and Beijing's stated hostilities towards the Republic of China, an independent democracy also known as Taiwan. In the last Parliament, I served as a member on the special committee concerning Canada-China relations. Over approximately 30 meetings, which I think would have continued had the election not been called, we issued 3 reports and heard from dozens of expert witnesses concerning Canada's relationship with the People's Republic of China. While it was always illuminating, it was not always news or information our government wanted to highlight. And I think as one example, concerns around security at the Winnipeg lab, which there was a debate and struggle at the highest levels that included this chamber far outside the special committee. That issue remains unresolved. Nevertheless, despite this at times divisive and heated debate, our work largely was conducted across party lines, even on contentious issues, such as studying the deteriorating democratic and human rights situation in Hong Kong. There was a consensus by members that Canada can and should do more. I believe the reason for this consensus, and this consensus, of course, we saw as well on the motion concerning the Uyghurs, the genocide of the Uyghurs within China. The reason for this growing consensus, was that a growing number of Liberal MPs, mainly those who sit outside of Cabinet, feel the Government of Canada has overstated the importance of China to our nation's well-being, or worse, abandoned our values and at times has even kowtowed to Beijing. This is something that parliamentarians don't want to see, Canadians certainly don't want to see, and it is why I think the committee operated as well as it did to raise issues, ask questions, and to seek answers. These members, I believe, like members on opposite sides, believe it is wrong to promote an economic relationship with Beijing as a primary tenet of Canada's foreign policy, while staying largely silent on the mistreatment of Uyghurs, Tibetan Falun Gong practitioners who are prosecuted, along with Christians, as well as citizens in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and democracies throughout Asia. These MPs understand that in the years ahead, it is more important to partner and ally with democratic nations than totalitarian regimes. Finally, with the Special Committee on Afghanistan preparing to present its report to the House of Commons, there is opportunity to resurrect the Special Committee on Canada-China relations. An opportunity that I ask other members, regardless of party affiliation, to support by voting in favour of this motion. One reason why I am so outspoken on issues related to Beijing's mistreatment of its own citizens is a result of my time in and traveling throughout China. I've long admired China, its diverse people, and all its parts. I'm what you might have called a sinophile before relations between Beijing and Western nations worsened. 25 years ago, I moved to Hong Kong, and within months of my arrival, the territory's national allegiance shifted from British colonial rule to the People's Republic of China. This was done peacefully, and I know Hong Kong's then 6.5 million residents had hope twinned with trepidation. The British government had negotiated a 50-year agreement with Beijing that would maintain Hong Kong's domestic autonomy and basic freedoms. Sadly, today those freedoms are largely gone, or they exist on paper but aren't respected in the courts or by Hong Kong's leaders, who are appointed by Beijing in mainland China. Democrats have been jailed or forced to flee. The free press has been shuttered, its owners jailed, and the agreement with Beijing on these supposed freedoms isn't worth the paper it was printed on. While Beijing was abandoning its commitment to Hong Kong, it was also becoming more hostile elsewhere. In July of 2020, I highlighted the mistreatment of Uyghurs. I called on the former Minister of Global Affairs to launch an independent investigation into forced labor camps operating in mainland China. In January 2020, Ottawa finally acted by announcing their intention to support tougher restrictions on products being imported from that region. This announcement was 6 months late, and unfortunately, unlike other international allies who are taking tougher actions to root out forced labor in commercial supply chains, Canada's government will not impose financial penalties on companies that do not comply with our government's directive. This is largely due to their practice of prioritizing mainland China's interests in order to get along with Beijing. The government must go further to safeguard Canada's values and interests. Financial penalties on companies that use forced labor in supply chains must be added to its reforms. As well, Magnitsky sanctions must be applied to top Communist Party officials who continue to commit crimes. Now more than ever, Canada needs a principled foreign policy that promotes freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law abroad. And if this special committee was important when it was established several years ago, it is now urgent with the deteriorating war situation in Ukraine. That is because the parallels between what is happening in Eastern Europe and possibly, and I pray it doesn't, in Asia are all too clear. We have Russia, which has declared war for no other reason than to gobble up an independent country, Ukraine. Around the world, in Beijing, it too claims a piece of territory as its own, in this case Taiwan, as a province. And like Russia, it has said it will use force to retake this piece of territory. This is something that should concern parliamentarians not only in this country, but around the world. We've been put on notice, I think, that this is a real possibility, not only because it is happening now in Ukraine, but China has said is an option going forward. And of course, we can see the devastating results every day, sadly, on our television, our smartphones, regarding what is happening in Ukraine. So force is an option that I think this Parliament must deal with, must recognize, and confront. So questions for this committee, what it could include. We've seen in Russia that Canada has imposed many economic sanctions as a way to punish and deter Russia's aggression. Can we do this with respect to mainland China? And if we do, what is Canada's exposure to sanctions? What is our ability to help democratic Taiwan, of which many members on the government side profess friendship and even admiration for? Can we help Taiwan continue to govern itself peacefully? Should Beijing's rhetoric move from words to military action. And I think importantly as well, and this is where the committee could probe the federal government, are there voices or opinions in the federal government who believe that Taipei should simply surrender its autonomy so other nations can maintain good relations with mainland China? In effect, trading off friends for opportunity elsewhere. We see the need for this committee to act, to ask questions by looking at Europe, where Putin's war machine continues to commit atrocities against the Ukrainian people every day for one purpose alone, and that is submission and control. This is something we never imagined would happen after the Iron Curtain fell, but has created deeper concerns of how the world would respond if Beijing invaded Taiwan in the same fashion. I think parliamentarians have a duty to ask some of these questions to receive responses from the Government of Canada, if for no other reason that we can satisfy ourselves that they are being considered and that solutions are being drawn up in concert with our allies. At the same time, there must be a study into how Beijing continues to deepen its influence in our domestic affairs through our markets, espionage, and intimidation. Many of you will recall, actually, Madam Speaker, I'll continue. Many of you, Madam Speaker, just a quick note. I have eight minutes left. Okay, thank you very much. Many of you will recall the Zhejiang Mining Group, a state-owned enterprise from China, purchasing Canada's Neo-Lithium Corporation earlier this year. A fire sale of a critical mineral mine in Canada that should have been promoted or highlighted as a national security review, and it should have been blocked. Unfortunately, this didn't happen. This is another area where the committee should investigate to see what decisions or what information went into this decision. Why, when it comes to Beijing, is the government reluctant to turn down these kind of purchases? I believe that members on both sides of this House believe critical mining projects in Canada should be owned and operated by Canadian firms or trusted allies in order to maintain and protect our national security. Another study that we could look at, this committee could look at, what about the Canadian success story of Nortel networks? In 2004, over 70% of the world's internet traffic ran on Canadian fiber optic technology produced by Nortel. It is believed that the Chinese military launched concentrated cyber attacks for 10 years against Nortel's headquarters in Canada, stealing thousands of sensitive documents and other company secrets. It simply could not compete against Huawei and ultimately ended up in bankruptcy. To quote Global News, it would be similar to a foreign army constructing a hidden tunnel into Canada's treasury vaults and marching out unimpeded with gold bars. Were Canadian pensions, life savings, and technology stolen? Again, another question for this committee. A third one, which I think is of growing importance, is the use of our capital markets by the People's Republic of China, its state enterprises, to advance its financial interests. Now, this is something that has gone largely unexplored. I don't think there's a sense of the exposure that Canadian capital markets have towards the People's Republic of China, and this is something that could be detrimental to our country's well-being should we ever see a conflict erupt between Taiwan and the People's Republic of China. I've heard some of friends opposite talk about the need to help Taiwan join the comprehensive and progressive agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. I think this is welcome news. I think it is a sign of great progress that there is certainly multi-partisan support for seeing Taiwan step up and play a greater role in international relations and affairs. Taiwan's entry into the CPTPP would also promote high standard trade rules. Now, regrettably, China also wants entry into this organization, but I do not believe it meets the labor, environmental, and human rights issues that would see it come in. But having said that, this is a discussion, I think, for parliamentarians to engage in. And, Madam Speaker, I think I'll end with a request that members consider this on the motion, the merit of the motion, and with some concern, though, that in the past, while we saw all opposition parties unite on this, that might not happen this time. I don't know the reasoning or the deal-making that went behind Motion 11, which has now tied the NDP and the Liberals into a pact. It is my deep hope that the NDP will show its commitment to human rights and international affairs and vote as they did before to continue this committee for no other reason than to ask questions and see where the answers take us. I think it would be wrong, and I think the NDP will fall should they vote otherwise on this motion, just as a way to keep relations happy with the Liberals. It is important that all members have the opportunity to be heard on these questions from all parliamentary caucuses, that we ask questions, we look for answers, and we table reports that will protect Canada, ensure our citizens are safe, but also, I believe, in the long run, work to improve relations between the People's Republic of China and Canada. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the time to make these comments.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire de la ministre de l'Emploi, du Développement, de la Main-d'œuvre et de l'Inclusion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I applaud the honourable colleague for the excellent job he did in explaining the complexity of the relationship between Canada and China. But where he failed to convince is the necessity of this particular committee, knowing that there are already 4 committees that are existing that can deal with the different complexities and issues related to the Canada-China relationship. And so could the members explain what this committee would add that is not already covered by the existing 4 committees?
The other member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Well, I think, and my honourable member recently, he mentioned one, Foreign Affairs, which is already overworked with looking at a number of international issues. But what would it bring that the others aren't is focus on one of our most important foreign relations in the world. And that focus would allow it to raise questions, seek answers, hear from Canadians, hear from expats from mainland China, and from other observers around the world. So it's the intensity, it's in the focus. And I can understand why the government would prefer to avoid that, but that makes it all the more important, particularly as we see what's happened in Ukraine and how Beijing's threats have gone from being something that we had a difficult time wrapping our brains around, but now we can see every day in Eastern Europe.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Abitibi, Bay James, Nunavik, EU.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je tiens à remercier mon collègue du Nouveau-Brunswick Sud-Ouest pour son beau discours. D'ailleurs, on sait fort bien que la technologie est importante et que les impacts sont majeurs s'il n'y a pas de surveillance. D'ailleurs, la puissance économique chinoise est telle que tout appui direct ou indirect à Taïwan aurait de graves répercussions sur l'économie du Canada, alors que c'est une grande partie de la chaîne d'approvisionnement qui provient de la Chine. Donc, j'aimerais ça que mon collègue me dise d'où est l'importance vraiment du comité spécial Canada-Chine et pourquoi, encore une fois.
For New Brunswick Southwest.
Et merci beaucoup. Et d'après moi, ça c'est une question majeure pour ce comité. Si on a une confrontation entre Taïwan et la République de Chine, c'est quoi l'impact sur le Canada, sur nos travailleurs, sur nos produits? Ces questions n'ont pas été posées jusqu'à date parce qu'avant l'Ukraine, la guerre en Ukraine, on ne pensait pas vraiment que c'était possible. Mais voilà, aujourd'hui, c'est possible. Il faut demander ces questions, trouver des réponses pour les Canadiens et pour que le gouvernement du Canada réagisse.
And comments. The honourable for Winnipeg Centre.
Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his intervention. Yesterday, and we absolutely have to uphold human rights without qualification. Yesterday, the NDP put forward a motion condemning the murder of a Palestinian journalist. It was voted against by a member of his party. And I'm wondering if my honourable colleague agrees with me that it's important not to be selective about when to uphold human rights and when to not uphold human rights, especially with the motion they put forward today. It seems like they're contradicting themselves in terms of being the Conservative Party being actual human rights defenders.
Honourable member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Well, to that I would say, like the NDP or any party, the Conservative Party doesn't speak with a single voice. There are many different opinions. And as to the issue that's being raised, I would say simply this. I would say simply this, that illuminating difficulties, challenges in one area where there's a relationship, in this case China, doesn't mean Parliament, a committee, doesn't look at it elsewhere. So I think the wrong approach would be to say, because a motion was rejected yesterday, this motion should be rejected. To my NDP, who obviously feels very passionately about what has happened and the murder of the journalist, which is something terrible, I would just say that I think she would agree. Not looking at either does not make this country a better place. Let's look at the motion ahead of us, vote on it, and we can come back to other debates on other days. Thank you.
Gentleman for Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And just briefly to the previous question, I think all members of the House agree that it's a terrible thing that a journalist was killed in a war zone. But to presume, as one member of this House did, that this person was intentionally shot execution style is not something that any independent investigation has concluded, and it's important to have that independent investigation before making the presumptions that members of the House make. And it's typical of some members of the House when we try to have a conversation about the genocide going on in China that they always want to say, well, what about Israel? But I want to ask the member, I know he spent some time living in Hong Kong. Many people were deeply concerned about the arrests we saw this week in Hong Kong, the arrest of Cardinal Zen, who is a great champion of democracy, a 90-year-old retired cardinal, much loved within the Catholic community but beyond. Also the arrest of Denise Ho, a singer who is a Canadian citizen and a prominent activist on LGBTQ issues. There are a number of other people that were arrested as well. And it's disappointing to see such prominent figures, another Canadian, a senior religious leader, are arrested, showing that really flagrant disregard of the Chinese government for the agreements they've made with respect to Hong Kong. I wonder if the member, as someone who spent time in Hong Kong, has a reaction to those events.
Member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Thank you. Well, I do, because I think it's a pattern we have seen with Beijing's not just increased heavy-handedness in Hong Kong, but outright control of the institutions of government there, which had been free, which had been self-governing, and which had been a beacon for people throughout not just Asia, but the world. And of course, my honourable colleague mentioned a number of people. Of course, there's Jimmy Lai as well, who was the owner of the Apple Daily. And what the government seeks to do by these arrests, whether it's in the arts, whether it's in religious figures or business figures, it's to send the signal that if we can arrest and stop these people, we can arrest and stop whoever we like.
Commentaire, l'honorable député de Shefford.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Je remercie mon collègue pour son discours. Et en fait, ce comité-là était là avant l'élection, encore une conséquence des élections précipitées qui ont eu lieu l'an dernier. Et la situation n'a pas changé en Chine depuis, à ce que je sache, depuis l'an dernier jusqu'à maintenant. Alors, si le comité est en place, il est encore tout aussi important. Et en tant que porte-parole de la condition féminine, je me préoccupe particulièrement de la situation des femmes ouïghours, quand il a beaucoup parlé de la question des droits humains. On fait de la stérilisation forcée. Je suis aussi membre du groupe multipartite sur la traite des personnes, l'esclavage moderne, ce qui se passe dans les usines, en fait, en Chine, et l'impact sur la chaîne d'approvisionnement, et à quel point il faudrait aussi pencher sur cette question-là. Voici d'autres raisons pour mettre en place ce comité-là, le remettre en place, parce qu'oublions pas qu'il était là avant la dernière élection.
The honourable member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Non, c'est absolument correct. Puis si on n'avait pas eu l'élection, d'après moi, ce comité serait encore se siégeait encore. Et lorsqu'on parle des droits humains en Chine, c'est les mêmes choses, les mêmes droits qu'on parle ici au Canada. Pour les Autochtones, pour les femmes, pour les parents, pour toutes leurs citoyennes en Chine, en Taïwan, en Hong Kong. Et d'après moi, comme un Parlement, il faut regarder ces questions, il faut poser des questions difficiles, puis trouver des solutions comme canadiennes pour avoir un monde plus au paix avec moins de guerre. Merci.
For a brief question, the honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And to my honourable colleague from New Brunswick Southwest, I'm very concerned that we do start such a committee and that one of the first things we take up is the Canada-China Foreign Investment Protection Agreement, which has been lopsided and given the People's Republic of China abilities to suppress Canadian interests. And I wonder if he'd be interested, as it was his previous government under former Prime Minister Harper that executed this extremely lopsided agreement, if he would support that we study it at this point.
Member for New Brunswick Southwest, a brief answer, please.
I would. Look, I think many of us have miscalculated China. 25 years ago, or 23 years ago, when I was writing for the National Post, I believed, like a lot of people, that trade and globalization would see China develop, respect human rights. I, like I think a lot of Western commentators, was wrong. And I'm prepared to adjust course now and to look at China with a more critical eye. And if that includes looking at deals like the member mentioned, I think there should be no bounds on what this committee, because believe me, I think Canada's made mistakes. We can correct those mistakes and move forward. Thank you.